Aha, that's helpful, thank you. Hi, good morning. So as Shri said, I've got I think you introduced yourself as a maker. I think part of my job is a changer, and I represent a fairly aging organization that's one of the pillars of capital markets, and I think part of our job is to produce solidity, but actually in a world of huge change, there's a lot to do. And my job, as you can see here, is I lead the innovation side of things for our assurance business globally. And to give you a sense of context for that, we employ about 87,000 people in our assurance business across about 150 countries, and our revenues of this last year about $15 billion. So it gives you a sense of the scale of the business that we're looking after. What I wanted to talk to you today about, though, was the huge opportunity that I see for AI and finance. And what I mean by finance is not financial institutions, but the way that finance works in businesses and the way that people communicate and trade with each other. So, to do that, though, what I wanted to do is take you back a tiny bit, and precisely about just on 600 years or so. So you may or may not have heard of this person, but Luca Pacioli has been largely credited with inventing accounting, the father of accounting. So why did he do it? So before he invented accounting and double-entry bookkeeping, there was no real means of companies working out how they could actually work out what they were worth. They didn't even know necessarily what they owed their customers, what their customers owed them. So you can imagine pretty much of a world of mayhem before that. And so what he invented was a structured way of accounting for business so that people could understand what they owed, what their customers owed them, what the business was valued at. And in essence, if you imagine, he established a way of trading. It enabled trade to happen. And then, almost, like most good ideas, most people reinvented it and took his idea. And then before you know it, the global world of accounting actually happened 600 years ago or so. And the bedrock, basically, of how companies actually trade with each other was formed. The sad news, though, is that 600 years forward, very little has actually changed, which is a shame. But what I wanted to talk to you today about is the huge opportunity that actually represents and what we need to do about it. So, if we look at healthcare, I think there's hardly a day goes past, and I don't know what you think when you read in the press, but there's heroic efforts that are going on in healthcare I see today. Even in the last couple of years, the AI's ability and the brilliant minds fused with this ability, not just in the diagnostics of illness, but now increasingly in the cure of diseases, and the idea that actually you can have a cure bespoke to you, was almost like science fiction a couple of years ago and now is coming to the fore. So I look at human health and I see that as an amazing explosion of knowledge and wisdom that's coming into the space and pushing society forward. When I contrast that with company health, however, I still see a world of basic accounting systems and largely Excel. And so little has changed in that space in the way that company health is both diagnosed and company health cured. So you have a real juxtaposition of human health, which is employing the best brains and the best technology, and company health, which is employing certainly not the best technology. So if you look at this, though, in terms of the business side of things, and I was conscious basically of the audience today, so just in the US alone, there's about 1.5 million accountants. They're responsible, if you think about it, for preparing the financial statements just for the market cap of US domestic companies alone of $34 trillion. And if you think about then the people who trust them to lend the money, that's $8 trillion invested in that. So that's a huge amount of risk and a huge amount of trust. You then have to think about the things and think about when things go wrong, and you suddenly realize it's pretty important that things go right. And so you begin to wonder, with all of this importance, why there's been so little change in what's actually happening. So the issue then, fairly succinctly, is accountants are there to tell the truth. They're there to keep businesses and the market honest, but the problem we face today is multiple-fold. We have a huge explosion of data, some real, some not real. We have transients. We have information which cannot be contained within companies. You've seen how fast bad news travels, and in fact, we love bad news, and we spread it really quickly. And you look at this, and you say to yourself, well, actually, if that's the role of an accountant, if that's the role of finance, how can it possibly continue in its current form without some sort of huge transformation? And I think it's going to get worse. I mean, this was a little cartoon that I picked up just to show you kind of the state of the nation. I think it's fair to say that we're living in a world of data obesity. I think that, you know, we've got a real problem with the amount of data that we consume. And I think it's polarized society into two forms from what I can see. There's one group of people who say there's so much data, I'm going to believe everything. And there's another bunch of people who say there's so much data and so much fake news, I'm going to believe nothing. But there's a real problem at large. So, what I think in terms of where we are with the answer, and it's a big statement to make this, but I do believe that AI has the ability to find what's right and what's wrong in financial information. But critically, and here's the kicker, in time to do something about it. I was reminded of the old adage that if I told you last week's lottery numbers, you'd say that's interesting. If I predicted accurately next week's, you'd be really quite excited. So the value of information and the time value of things is particularly important. And it's a big claim to make this, but what I wanted to do is take you through a tiny little bit of what we've been doing to show you that where I think the capability could go, and let's talk a little bit then how about the capability might actually expand a bit further. So, this is where I met Shri, and I think that there's some interesting lessons. One of the lessons that I learned about why accountants and finance haven't been using AI much is most folk involved in AI are not really interested in finance. I had a very humbling experience when I went around a number of major AI houses and said to them, I'm here to kind of reinvent finance with AI, and they said to me, it's too boring, we want to do healthcare, we want to do consumer, etc. And there was door after door that was not completely slammed, but gently closed in terms of the organization, because people were more excited about healthcare, societal things, consumer behavior. The moment I uttered the word accounting or finance, there was just a sort of a deathly silence. And it's kind of interesting that there weren't that many reasonable AI houses on the planet that were interested in this domain. And so when I actually first met Shri and he said, yeah, this is an interesting problem, I was surprised because I'd met a different reaction from many others. But over the last couple of years, what we've been doing is we've been experimenting with what many people thought was impossible. And I think it's interesting when you're in a world where someone says to you, you're never going to succeed, you're not right. And yet, somehow, when you are, it was their idea. And so it's funny how these things flip really quickly. And so I think what we did is, and you might find this a little dull, but I find it particularly exciting. What we did is we said actually that the way that company financial information is produced and distributed to the market and the way we make decisions as businesses is everything accumulates in what you call the general ledger. So that accumulates all your transactions. It's where you produce your financial statements. It's how you basically make decisions of what you're going to do in your business. So we took a large number of these and said to ourselves, can we find with infinite scale error and fraud in a company's financial information? And critically, can we do it in an unseen way? So in other words, can we train a machine to look at a company it's never seen before and go, that's wrong, that's right, and actually then start to delineate between errors that were, if you like, accidental, so those are true errors, and errors that were deliberate, and those are kind of on the more fraud side, okay? And so what we've been doing for the last couple of years is exactly that. And what we've been doing is really understanding how you begin to fuse the domain science of accounting and sort of forensic thinking into the domain science of AI, and how do the union of those two things work? I'd have to say to you they're fairly diametrically opposed, and so the cultural journey of fusing those domains together has been very curious at times and very interesting. But what we've developed is basically a machine which does just that. It allows basically the democratization of finding issues with speed and accuracy that you couldn't do today. And to be fair, what we found within this machine is it's better than any human could ever be because it can see everything, and it can do it in a speed that humans could only imagine. And so therefore, if you're a company there, and you're sitting as a company and you're sitting as a CFO and you've had lots of issues, you could throw more people at it, but we've found that that's a finite problem, really, because there's only so many people you can throw at things, and this is better than our best people. And I think there's a humbling experience, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this in the room, where the child you have actually built is more intelligent than the parent. And we have got to that point, and it's really exciting to see. So kind of a few illustrations of what this thing does. The first thing we taught it was to look for unusual accounting combinations, because thankfully, back to the 600-year-old accounting world, there are rules of how you have to account for things. And so what this thing has done is it's learned the rules and patterns of accounting and looks across vast amounts of information to find out where there are accounting irregularities and issues, and pulls them out with visual clarity. We've found that humans are really bad at interpreting numbers. Actually, they're much better, and the brain is much better at interpreting pictures. So part of the skill that we've had to learn is how do you take this big brain and turn it into a visual understanding where a human can interface with it, because otherwise the human won't trust it. So part of it really then around unusual account combinations. We've looked a lot at user behavior, and the great thing with AI is it produces context where rules can't give you context. So this really is around, one of the things we've found in companies, that when you find fraud and when you find error, you find people who don't do the job very often or deliberately sneak small things in that are not seen. And the good thing with AI is because it can do clustering very well and really, really understand what normal looks like, it's much more accurate at finding abnormal. And that's a really important feature when you're looking for the needle in the haystack. And a really good example for context is this final example on the product where you can see here it's beginning to understand the patterns of how people actually post transactions into the accounts. And one of the things that's interesting is this person actually, in this particular event, worked on a Saturday. Okay? But most people who are rules-based, and most rules-based engines, look for unusual transactions on weekends. So typically, if you're looking for something that's odd, you'll calibrate to say, show me something on a weekend. This person worked on a Saturday, but they didn't work on a Friday. So when they posted something on a Friday, there was a problem, and indeed there was. But a typical human wouldn't find something like that. So that's the first use case that we've been looking at to actually say, can we actually find what's right and wrong in numbers? But what we've really understood, though, is that as we've begun to interact with finance departments, and I've sat on both sides of the fence, I've sat as a policeman and basically as a finance person running large organizations as well. And these are the challenges that finance see today. There is a higher cost of finance than anybody would want. Issues are generally detected too late. Failures now are much more reputational than they were before because of the speed and the unforgiving nature of society. And if you've got a history of things going wrong, it's really, really tough as to how you actually work this through. So huge amount of issues, and what we're really saying is that we believe that there are a number of ingredients now to actually solve this. So the first one is we think that actually AI, anomaly detection and prediction in particular, will actually provide the capability of knowing what's right and wrong in numbers in time to do something about it. This is night and day from where we are today. So what we're saying today is that finance, which drives the capital markets, which drives the way that we trade, drives what we rely on, is largely based on human activity, largely based on sampling. We know there's lots of errors in that, and it's also based on after-the-event activity. Typically, you only find something after it's happened, well after it's happened. And particularly if you look at the world of audit, most audits are only conducted once a year, so the investors and the stakeholders rely on information that's a year old. What we're talking about here is a revolution of knowing what's right and wrong over everything. But the time element is really important. So we're talking about speed and accuracy. So that's the first element. The second element, and I'm sure this is obvious to many of you, but not obvious, I don't think, to many in the finance community, is that it's great if I could tell you everything that's right and wrong, but how do I begin to interpret it? How do I act on it? I'm a CFO, and you tell me I've got these things wrong or right. How do I know how wrong? How do I know what to deal with? We have to translate this into a score. And I was thinking the other day, and I've met with many doctors recently who have been sort of educating me on how human healthcare has cracked this problem. It's invented things like BMI. It's invented things like blood analysis. It's invented basic measures of human health, like blood pressure, that allow you to calibrate where you are, not just as a doctor, but as a consumer. At the moment, there are no such things in finance world. So if I'm talking about company wellness, we have to develop some scoring mechanisms to allow comparability, explainability to actually happen. This is really fundamental. This hasn't happened just yet, but if AI is going to be harnessed in a world where we're going to use things properly, scoring, and I don't mean model scoring, I'm talking about scoring of the overall results, needs to be invented. It hasn't yet been invented. There is no BMI of a company just yet. There may be a credit score, but that's just one piece. So, and many people have pioneered this. I mean, imagine trying to deal with the weather if I said to you, here we are in New York, and you know what? I feel it's kind of pleasant today. What would that mean? Is it the same? Do I wear a coat? Do I take an umbrella? What do I do? And so I think most of us in society, to make information useful, have calibrated it in the form of a score. And we need to do the same for company health and company wellness. The third piece, and I think that Shri touched on this, and this is probably my most important learning and probably one of the things that I think that I would encourage you most to think about is that people don't trust or work with software unless they love it. The experience is fundamental. I've got a very low attention span, and so when I go onto a website that feels slow or poorly designed, it's gone. Even if I want to desperately buy the product, I can't relate to something that is poorly designed or doesn't function properly. And I feel that if you imagine that we're going to develop something which keeps finance safe, something that people want to use, something which people become dependent on, you can develop beautiful algorithms, amazing scoring, but unless the user experience is brilliant, you just won't get the emotional attachment to get people to use it in the first place. We've learned a lot about this, actually, and I think there's a real issue here because you need two things to really land together. You need beautiful design that produces an emotional response, often simplicity, but you need fundamental usability. And having worked with programmers and designers, they sit in different ends of the spectrum. Beautiful isn't often usable, and usable is often ugly. And I think fusing those two things together is a fundamental way forward for how AI is going to be consumed in society. I think that's probably, if you're going to think about the biggest change you can make, you need to package the answers in ways that humans will enjoy and humans will trust. Because I think that was a brilliant talk just now around can you trust the models? The question for human beings is, can I trust the feeling and can I emotionally relate to this product where I care? So I'm almost thinking that algorithms are table stakes, and I'm glad there are many better brains than mine thinking about the repeatability and the reperformance and the transparency of the algorithms. Part of our challenge, though, is to say, can I actually get the customer and consumer to actually trust the experience and to love the experience? So, just bringing it together and taking it back, we started 600 years ago, and not a lot has changed. Now, though, we have an amazing capability. And I think what we are seeing in society is you can be forgiven for doing your best if the capability is not there. I'm saying now that the time is right to actually build a capability to actually transform the way the integrity of company financial information is actually dealt with. When that capability is there, the survival and the prosperity of the best companies will be those who adopt fastest and use fastest. And I think the extinction of companies will also come about by those who don't harness the capability. So, in closing, my feeling is that AI must and will transform the integrity of financial information. Thank you very much.